Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Improving Housing for Native American Communities. I'm Lauren Cloward, a Senior Policy Advisor here at the Western Governors Association. For those of us who aren't as familiar with WGA, I'd like to share a little bit about what we do. WGA is an instrument of the governors from the 22 westernmost states and territories for bipartisan policy development, information exchange, and collective action on some of the most pressing problems of our generation. Expanding access to housing is a significant priority for Western governors, which brings us to our topic of conversation today. Native Americans, whether living on or off tribal lands, experience disproportionately higher rates of substandard housing and homelessness and face significantly lower levels of homeownership than other populations. This webinar will explore federal policy recommendations and highlight innovative Native-led solutions across the West to address affordable housing challenges and enhance quality of life for Native American communities. And I think this conversation really will be solutions oriented, right? We know there are a lot of challenges in these areas, but we have a great lineup of panelists for you today that will highlight the work that's going on across the region. So let's get into it. I'll start by introducing the panelists we have here with us today, and this is just a small subset of what they do. I know they have a lot of other affiliations that they're involved with beyond their day jobs too. So Rudy Soto, Executive Director of the National American Indian Housing Council. We also have Dave Castillo, CEO of Native Community Capital. Jody Cahoon Perez, Executive Director of the Salish and Kootenai Housing Authority, and Paul Lumley, Chief Advancement Officer of the Native American Youth and Family Center, or NAYA. I'll turn it over to them for some brief opening remarks, and then we'll open it up to a moderated discussion. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to some of them at the end. But Rudy, I'll turn it over to you first.
Thanks, Lauren. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rudy Soto. I serve as the Executive Director for the National American Indian Housing Council. I want to thank the Western Governors Association for hosting this very important webinar today. NIHC, the National American Indian Housing Council, we're a membership-based national tribal nonprofit headquartered in Washington, D.C., just steps from the United States Capitol on the Senate side. And 2025 marks our 51st year of supporting tribal housing programs across the country. Founded in 1974, our mission is simple but critical to support tribes and their designated housing entities as they work to provide safe, decent, and affordable homes for Native communities. Our membership includes more than 280 voting members representing almost 500 American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities across 35 states. We also have associate members, including businesses and organizations that partner with tribes to support housing and community development across Indian country. We serve our members in a few key ways through training and technical assistance, everything from in-person workshops and webinars to on-site support for housing programs. Second, through policy and advocacy. NIHC is a strong voice in Washington, D.C., pushing for legislation to make federal programs more accessible and aligned with the day-to-day realities of housing development and ensuring tribal housing programs have the funding and tools they need. We also provide resources, research, best practices to help local programs succeed. And just as important, we create spaces for housing professionals to connect and learn from one another. So every year we host an annual convention and trade show, which is the largest gathering of tribal housing and community development professionals in the country. We organize a legislative conference each spring, winter in Washington, D.C., where tribal leaders and housing staff engage directly with policymakers. And throughout the year, we hold regional trainings, webinars. We also have a legal symposium that's coming up in Durant, Oklahoma in November, and roundtables that spotlight innovative solutions that seek to address the unique housing challenges that face Native communities. In short, NIHC exists to make sure tribal housing programs have the support, resources, and voice they need to thrive, and we're proud to stand alongside our members and partners as we continue this work. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rudy. We'll turn it over to Dave next.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen here. See if I get this right. Okay, Lauren, can you give me a verbal if you can see my screen?
Yes, I can
Okay,
see.
great. So my name is Dave Castillo. I serve as a CEO for Native Community Capital. We are a native CDFI and also a licensed mortgage bank in Arizona and New Mexico. I also serve on the board of directors for the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, the Housing Assistance Council, here regionally, the Tribal Homeownership Coalition of the Southwest, and I serve as the vice chair for the Arizona Industrial Development Authority. We serve tribes throughout Arizona and New Mexico. If you're not familiar with that geography, here's a map. You can see on the Arizona side, it makes up about 27% of the land base. And in New Mexico, at least northern New Mexico, a similar proportion. So tribal lands in Arizona and New Mexico are significant. We make loans for new homes and rehabilitation of existing homes using leasehold mortgages, and we underwrite to the HUD 184 loan guarantee product standard. Our work is made possible first by watershed legislation of almost 30 years ago. I know that graphic's a little dated, but looks nice, and really significant as far as the NAHASA legislation goes, and its reauthorization, quite honestly. But new policy tools are still needed, and the one on the right there is one that was recently rescinded and really provides a context for what the policy tools going forward look like. Although we have had success here in the Southwest from a national perspective, and despite the 100% guarantee against loss offered by the 184 to lenders, mortgage lending on tribal trust lands has not scaled. And I know this chart terminates at 2015, but I guarantee you the situation has not drastically improved. And so you might ask, well, why not? Isn't the mortgage process streamlined? Can't most folks get into a new home within 45 days? And off reservation, that is true. The thing I like to point to is title search. You can go to a title company, and the day you select a home, you could get title pulled the very same day. On tribal trust lands, that process entails several extra steps, and they're in place to avoid the historic taking of tribal lands, but there are other steps that require advocacy that could be alleviated, and I think the Road to Housing Act is a good place to start on some of those discussions. But here you can see getting title through a certified title status report has taken as long as 2 years, and so you can imagine what that does to a market. So the work of alleviating or improving the process remains exceedingly necessary. A recent study shows that the situation revealed in the previous line chart has gotten worse due to a lack of investment in tribal lands. And yet we and others have established excellent precedent for leveraging available resources. You can see here on this project, the leverage that was achieved by using the guarantees available through HUD. What is lacking is consistency in cultivating, growing, and expanding the partnerships that are necessary to scale this work. And so there is no silver bullet, really just the work of coming together to make progress for housing in communities characterized by historic and severe economic distress. With that, I'll look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We will have Jody introduce herself next.
Peschalu Pesia, Jody Cahoon Perez, Luis Quest, and I'm the Executive Director for the Salish and Kootenai Housing Authority on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Northwest Montana. I'm also a board member of the National American Indian Housing Council, so I work with Rudy and in that arena on the national scale, and I'm the vice chair for the United Native American Housing Association, which is regional Indian housing. And then I am part of the steering committee for the Montana Native Homeownership Coalition, which is just focused in the state of Montana for the tribes there. And then I do a lot of work at the tribal level and then specific for housing. So the overarching goal is to have everyone have a safe place. A lot of my tribal members, the community that I serve, they are dealing with a lot of trauma. And so I do my best to start dealing with the root causes, because just having a shelter over your head isn't necessarily everything that you need. And so, as you can see in this diagram, there is a level of assistance that is required to meet people where they're at. So I like to think of this gauge as like a gas gauge. And so red is E, and that's for emergency services like shelters, detox centers, treatment centers, transitional supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, affordable rentals, which is what we get funded through the 1937 Act housing, and then affordable homeownership, and then market rentals and homeownership. So you go from empty to full, and anyway, I inherited a program that is funded for 1937 Act units. And outside of that, we are dependent on partners, and we are dependent on flexible federal funding also. And so we've been able to create our first permanent supportive housing project on our reservation with CARES funding that was allocated to our tribe. And we are currently constructing transitional supportive housing, and that was made possible through NAHASDA funds, a competitive grant, and the tribe's ARPA dollars. And so that is in progress, under construction right now. We created a recovery village, and we partnered with a Native grassroots organization to provide the services for recovery. And we are set aside 28 low rent units, so they're subsidized so that people can use that program. And we've been starting to work with our state's continuum of care funding. So we're trying to get funds for our homeless population that way. And we were able to build a new home site with ARPA allocation through NAHASDA. And so all of the housing that we need, everything I'm doing is just drops in the bucket. And one thing that I could do, if you guys could please help us support the continued funding of Indian housing, because that's the avenue that I am using to help my people heal. So that's my ask of the governors and any partners that are listening, is to please help share our story and our plea to have Indian housing reauthorized through NAHASDA. Lamlips.
Thanks so much, Jody. Paul, we'll have you finish us off with opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. My name is Paul Lumley. I'm a citizen of the Yakama Nation, and I'm the Chief Advancement Officer of the Native American Youth and Family Center, which is located here in Portland, Oregon. I was away for 2 years, but I was also previously the CEO for NAYA. And a while back, 2007, 2009, I was actually the Executive Director of NAA, National American Indian Housing Council. And it's great to see you here, Rudy. So NAYA is a fairly large nonprofit in the Portland metropolitan area, including Southwest Washington. Our mission is to enhance the diverse strengths of our youth and families in partnership with the communities we serve through cultural identity and education. We are youth-centered, family-driven, and elder-guided, and we are about 50 years old. While I was at NAIHC, I was so impressed with the power of NAHASDA. It truly is amazing. We were able to get it reauthorized. I think it was in the year 2008. It was quite a lift, but it is a very powerful program. While I was back there, we were promoting the leveraging of low-income housing tax credits. And it sounds easy to do until you actually do it. And we're doing it at NAYA, and it's a different experience actually doing it than promoting it. But it's turned out really wonderful. We are an urban non-government entity, but we were able to leverage NAHASDA in important ways. We have a total of 8 properties, 2 of them with Native preference. Nasaika Ilahi, which means our place, has 59 units. With the set aside of about 10 units for Native preference as a partnership with the Salish tribe. And Mamuk Tokati, means making beautiful. That's also a partnership with the Salish tribe, and also it has an artist preference policy. So that's pretty exciting to have Native artists there in the building. Both of them are within a mile of where our campus is located. And a third one called Hayutilixum, which is also near our 10-acre campus, about a mile away. And that's the focus on permanent supportive housing. So pretty excited about those three. They came up right in the middle of the pandemic, so it was pretty hard. But we were able to leverage some NAHASDA funding, not a lot, but it was so important to us because we were able to introduce Native preference policy in the Portland area. And that was really done by the unique partnership with the Salish tribe, where they were actually an investor in the project, and they extended the Native preference policy to a nonprofit like NAIA. So that's what made it a sort of unique and kind of difficult project to implement. Tisolo Village opened up just this summer. It's a rebuild. It was an interesting project there because we own the property, and it gave NAIA the opportunity to become a nonprofit developer, Native nonprofit developer. So that was pretty exciting. It gave us more control over how the project was implemented, especially during the transition of residents who had to be moved away for a period of time while the project was rebuilt. And we were able to give them many more services and financial resources. And many of them came back. Some of them choose to buy their own home through a Native homeownership program at NAIA, which is pretty exciting. We had a groundbreaking ceremony just last week with Portland Community College and Home Forward, our local housing authority, to open up Chaku Kumtek Haas. And that's 85 units. NAIA has control over, I believe, 30 of them. And we're opening up our new Native Early Child Learning Center here in just a few months. So we're pretty excited about that. And tomorrow we're having a groundbreaking ceremony for our next property on the waterfront of Vancouver, Washington, 95 units, and that'll be tomorrow. Pretty exciting work that NAIA is going through. And I think one of the interesting things about NAIA as a nonprofit doing this work is that we started out as a social services program promoting youth and families. We have a Native American high school. We have a broad range of supports to help those students be successful, either not just graduating, but also going to college or going on to get a job or a career, and then serving the families. And so it's a broad range of services, and we branched out into economic development, and housing really picked up, I would say, in the early 2000s. So it's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting to see just a little bit of NAHASDA stretch a long way. If you live in an urban environment where you have a nonprofit that can do this, it would be a great benefit to you to explore it. I'm also the board chair of Enchiwana Housing, which means Big River for the Columbia River. And we do tribal housing there. And it's also interesting because it's non-government area. That's a tribal fishing area for sure, but the tribes do not service that area on their reservation. And so this is a rural area that is very similar in needs that NAIA has. And so it's pretty exciting to see this 5-year-old nonprofit start to grow. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So I have a couple of questions for our panelists, but this is just a reminder for those of you who are joining, who just joined, that you can put any questions that you have for our panelists in the Q&A section at the top of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the last 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to ease us into this a little bit and start off I know some of you mentioned some of the specific challenges, housing challenges for Native American communities, both on and off tribal lands. We have a broad range of experiences here, and I know, people tend to focus on a lot of the challenges on tribal lands specifically, but Paul and NAIA work in some of the urban areas as well, and rural areas off tribal lands. So we will go ahead and start by just having you guys expand a little bit more on some of the challenges that you see with housing for Native American communities. And who would like to give that a go?
I'll go first.
Thanks, Jody.
Okay. What I have recognized is that we have 530 low rent units And if we don't have any affordable houses for them to progress into home ownership, then they get stuck in low rent. So it prevents anyone from our waiting list to move in. And so just the complexity of having all of them dependent on each other makes it harder to progress. And just like you have to have land and you have to have infrastructure, and then you have to have funding for housing, and then you have to have a market, and you have to have lenders. So they're all tied together. And so if there's one bottleneck, then it kind of slows down the whole process. And so what I've recognized is that is it the chicken or the egg? You got to just go wherever you can find the partners to move that, advance that, and then try to catch up later. And so it's like putting these drops in the bucket is anywhere in the bucket that you can. We have problems with finding lending on our reservation. We have the HUD 184. That's available on trust properties. And then we have a tribal credit department. And our tribal credit department is currently having a funding freeze. So we only have the 184, but that's still further advanced than most of the other reservations. So there's a lot of red tape because we can't conform to the rules of the funding programs. And it's really hard because when you have turnover in positions, or like our superintendent, we used to have a superintendent on our reservation, that office was closed under the new administration. And then the superintendent and his assistant both left early for the early retirement option. And so now we have to reroute all of our documents through the Portland office. So it gets more cumbersome every time it evolves. It's not getting easier, it's getting more difficult. So anyway, that's what I've noticed on my reservations is that they're so connected with each other, and it's hard to make progress if there's not one coordinator trying to push it through to streamline.
Yeah, Lauren, I'd like to add to that. Beyond the technical challenges or political or capital, I think it really comes down to a lack of precedent or lack of precedent setting activities. And so there's this one little story I like to tell. The state of Arizona at one time put on a access to capital for affordable housing development with tribes, and they brought them in as a cohort. And then they paired they broke up the cohort into groups of 4 or 5, and they paired each one of those groups with someone either from a bank, a federal agency, or a state agency. And my favorite story from that whole, the whole experience was excellent, right? Because it's about creating connections. And my favorite story is the gentleman from, I believe it was the state of Arizona Department of Housing, the LIHTC program, was assigned to a team that was made up from several different tribes, but one lady from Hopi in particular. And when we were debriefing at the end of it, she said, this was such a great opportunity, not just to learn, but to make a connection. And my new friend here, and she was referencing the guy from ADOH, she said, he's lived his entire life in Arizona, and he's never been to the Hopi reservation. And so I invited him up to one of our social dances, and it turns out that his son and my son both run cross country. And he told me that I could call him anytime if I ever had any questions on LIHTC, that it sounds like we have a project that would fit perfectly with the low-income housing tax credit program, which I've known nothing about before then. But now I have someone that I can call, and he has someone that he can visit to know more about the Hopi tribe and our housing needs. And it was that kind of situation where, like I said in my opening comments, there's, a lot of the work that needs to be done isn't really sexy, right? It's, appraisal stuff, it's building codes, it's talking about conveyances and how those happen and leveraging. But when you have a commitment from someone at a tribe and with a state agency or a bank or a federal agency that have made a connection and realize that each other is important in this process, I think that's where things really take off. So lots of challenges, but that's where the opportunity begins, and I think how we begin to solve these issues.
in the urban environment, it's been pretty challenging with these large projects. They're all between 50 and 100 units. And so we're trying to raise tens of millions of dollars for each project. And inevitably, the funding isn't enough just coming from LIHTC or state funding, which has been amazing, or bank loans. There's still a gap in funding. And so every time you try to fill the gap with other resources, it adds a layer of complexity and deliverables. Which makes the project more interesting, don't get me wrong, and really gets us to serving the needs of the community. It could be drug and alcohol rehabilitation, or artists, or permanent supportive housing, or other themes with the project. But once the project is built, that's the easy part, believe it or not. The hard part is actually managing it for 15 years. And the lack of resources for the ongoing community support is really challenging. The resident support is really challenging. And having good property management companies out there is something that is in dire need in the Portland area. I don't know, it's like elsewhere, but we could really use some good property management. We're up to over 300 units ourselves now, and we're starting to explore becoming our own property management entity. So that's something we're exploring, just because it's been such a challenge. But yeah, these are big, complicated projects. We're really proud of them, but we are joined at the hip with them for 15 years at a minimum. So it's exciting and also a little scary, but we're making it happen.
Thanks, Paul, for that urban perspective. As someone who's lived off reservation for much of my life, many people don't know that over 70% of Native people live off reservation. So those intersections are really important to us generally. So I just want to touch on what Jody previously mentioned, the challenge with lending and mortgage finance. Often because most tribal land is held in trust by the federal government, many standard mortgage processes don't apply. I previously worked for the United States Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Agency, and by and large, the agency doesn't make a lot in comparison to what it could or should of loans, single-family home loans or guaranteed loans on tribal reservations, trust lands. And when it could, there's a lot of perceived risks, unfamiliarity with trust land rules and regulations. And that's a challenge to navigate. Oftentimes, the tribes need to establish MOUs. The Department of Veterans Affairs has been really good at establishing those MOUs, but it would help a lot if there was more streamlining, so that if a tribe had a MOU with the Department of Veterans Affairs, that would also apply to rural development or Fannie Mae, some of these other loan products that are available and backed by the government. And I'll just give one example. I remember encountering a tribal housing leader from the Southwest that talked about how they had a project with many families that were qualified, credit ready to buy, and they were all excited and they had that dream intact until they couldn't navigate the rules and regulations required to navigate the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Interior processes, and it was held up so long that by the time the project could have moved forward, those families many of them or individuals were no longer qualified, and that was deeply discouraging, and many just simply wouldn't re-engage. And so when you have situations like that, I mean, it's heartbreaking, because that's life-changing, lifting people out of poverty and creating economic opportunity that will carry on for current and future generations.
Thank you all for your insights. And I think a number of you alluded to some of the federal hooks here, and WGA is a federally facing advocacy organization. So we have a housing policy resolution that we've had for about 3 years now, and I'll throw that in the chat. It's up for renewal this fall, which is partly why we're having this conversation. And so I'd really like to dig into some of the specific federal efforts and federal programs and resources, and what you all see as ways for those programs and resources to be improved for housing both on and off tribal lands. We talked a little bit about NAHASDA, and for those who aren't familiar, that's the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, and noting that that hasn't been reauthorized in over a decade now. So I'd like to just dig into some of those specifics, right? Rudy touched on this too with capacity and some of the burdens and processes. I know Jody relies a lot on competitive grants from the federal government, but there are, a lot of barriers with that process, especially for small rural areas. So if you all could touch on specific recommendations on the federal side, and then also a little bit on what you think really might be achievable in the next couple of years. Where's that political momentum? And I think we had a question come in through the chat as well, sort of around the current federal environment and how that's affecting funding specifically for tribal housing initiatives, and if it is.
I'm happy to jump in here. Thanks, Lauren, for bringing attention and more awareness to the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, NAHASDA. As was mentioned, why I consider, Paul among the greats is because the last time it was reauthorized was in 2008. The authorization for the law expired in 2013 and hasn't passed since, although the law is still recognized as the foundational, essential tribal housing program, backbone of, tribal housing programs across the country, equivalent to public housing authorities across the country. They're just so vital as a component for our society and our country. And many also don't understand that, this isn't really a handout in any way, shape, or form. Our ancestors of tribal governments, of tribal nations, early as the country was forming, had the foresight to forge these treaties and legal agreements while conceding lands for the purposes of housing, education, and health care. And that's been held up through the courts and the Congress since the foundation of the country to today. And NAHASDA, actually, the tribal housing programs have been funded at an increase in the recent years to catch up to inflation. In 2024, we received a substantial funding increase, and this Congress right now has ensured that there are no pending cuts to these programs, just understanding how vital they are and how well spent these dollars, these taxpayer dollars, are invested. And so what we need is NAHASDA's reauthorization to provide for critical updates, such as streamlining environmental review processes that can reduce delays that are duplicative, multiple agencies, expanding access to federal resources by ensuring tribes and tribally designated housing entities, we call them TDHEs, that are eligible for and to access HUD counseling and continuum of care funds, reducing administrative burdens by consolidating reporting requirements. So we're needing to reduce red tape, expand access to resources, modernize outdated provisions, and reinforce tribal self-determination and self-sufficiency. And we are very optimistic this Congress that can happen because of the funding being protected. That's a strong signal. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity because Congressman Coles, the appropriations chair, has strong bipartisan relationships, such as Senator Murkowski, the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs chair, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii, Native Hawaiians. This law is very vital for those communities as well. And we have a couple freshmen that we're working with in Congress on both sides of the aisle from out west. Congressman Troy Downing from Montana, who is going to lead the House version of NHASA's reintroduction to get it reauthorized as Congress, as well as freshman Janelle Bynum from Oregon. So we're extremely excited to try and get this across the finish line in this Congress because of the recognition of housing as a crisis in terms of affordability. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that NHASA is our cornerstone for sure. The Road to Housing Act, I think, is very intriguing and has a number of those provisions that Rudy just mentioned. But likewise, I think a big part of what is missing is the partnerships expanding and being sustained, and particularly in the work that we do on mortgage lending, the capital markets and financial institutions and the secondary market, that's what makes a mortgage market work. And we just do not have access to that. Now, the GSEs are moving towards privatization, and it looks like that's going to happen. Fannie Mae is a $4 trillion corporation, and it doesn't have any substantial, substantive, meaningful presence in Indian country. That needs to change. Now, not that there hasn't been work done. I think their sister Freddie Mac launched the Heritage One product, and I think that time will tell if that's going to meet the needs, or maybe that kind of informs what financial products from or via the GSCs looks like. But access to the secondary market is absolutely critical. Duty to serve was an interesting experiment when it comes to Indian country. And I think the question is, what comes next? And with regard to the federal programs and the B3 bill that passed recently in terms of tax credits, making some permanent and expanding others, I think the question there is how do those work in Indian country and rural markets generally relative to pricing vis-a-vis urban projects. These are all questions that I think need to get unpacked. People like Paul and folks in Minneapolis and other parts of the country are going through that on projects that they're working on, but there's a lot of work yet to get done. And I wouldn't want to overlook the relationship between tribes and the states. That's something that historically has not been maybe as robust as relationships with federal agencies, but particularly for my colleagues on the Arizona Industrial Development Authority Board, the governor's office, both here in Arizona and New Mexico, tremendous support and a lot of work to do. And so the question there is, in addition to the federal legislation and the federal programs, how do states match that, and how do we work across those various authorities, and even down to the county and the city level as well, particularly for those tribes that abut metro areas. So a lot of work to do. I think a lot of opportunity, and certainly we need to continue to look at what the federal tools allow, what they don't, and not look away, even just because maybe it's not looking great at one time or another, but really just engage and continue to engage. Thanks.
For the urban environment, well, elsewhere too, permanent supportive housing vouchers are extremely important, and they continue to be threatened. They're not directly threatened right now, but it seems like every year there's a threat that it's going to be eliminated or reduced substantially. And we rely upon that resource to get the neediest of the needy off the streets into safe and affordable housing. And if we lose that funding, then it will force us to question whether or not we can continue the project, or maybe we can't without that resource, or force these people back out into the streets. And it's not a decision that NAHA makes uniquely. It's something that every housing authority and every housing property developer it would have to be faced, because we just can't survive without that resource, or we're going to put people into the streets. And as mentioned earlier, we already have a housing crisis, and the loss of that kind of federal funding would be a huge blow to every community across the United States. So supporting that resource would be very, very wise.
And I'll just add, so right when I became executive director 6.5 years ago, everyone was being funneled through the low rent program when that wasn't the best fit for the needs of those individuals. So probably 10% of our tenants were taking up 90% of our efforts and our resources because they weren't equipped to become a renter yet. And so that's why I created that housing needs spectrum, because I recognized that low rent isn't the best option for everyone. It is for our working poor. But if you aren't working, if you're dealing with other issues and you're not ready to become a renter, that we should not be putting you into a low rent unit. And so that's why I've been trying to expand our services and create partnerships with people who can provide wraparound services so that we are dealing with the root causes of the instability of the housing insecurity, not just giving someone a roof over their head. It might help them for a few months, but if they can't maintain their lease compliance, then they'll be evicted. And so it's not dealing with root causes. And so the continuum of care funding, it was opened up to tribes probably 4 years ago, but you have to partner with an existing COC. And so I haven't figured out how to do this yet, but we did do an application to build a new permanent supportive housing program, and it was through our state of Montana COC. They're the only one in our whole state. And so we did do the builds application, and we'll see if that's successful. But the only other tribal program that is supported through the COC is a school pantry at Browning High School. And that is all. Out of all of their programs, that's the only tribal. And so I want to figure out how to dial into that funding to be able to provide those additional resources to my people. And there's also, we used to be part of Neighbor Work Montana's housing counseling. We were part of their partnership, their network. And then they started in, I think, 2016, you had to get certified. And we had a waiver for the certification, but when we didn't reach that certification, they kicked us out. And then we got certified and they wouldn't let us back in. So we are not eligible for the program because we're not a nonprofit. We're a tribal government entity. And so we were counting on about $40,000 a year through HUD housing counseling, which seems insignificant, but it's a lot for us. We only have 2 staff dedicated to homeownership. And so now I'm depending on Indian Community Development Block Grant funds to provide that, and our NAHASDA funds to provide that service. Because if we aren't planting the seeds, if we aren't trying to streamline the process to homeownership, nobody else is. And so our biggest barriers are just lack of resources. And we've been doing all of our builds with federal grants. Usually it's all through NAHASDA. So we had CARES Act allocation through NAHASDA. We had ARPA allocation through NAHASDA. And then there was ICDBG CARES that was competitive. We didn't get that. I think they said they were doing first come, first serve. Within the first minute and a half, all the funds were gone. So then they got ICDBG ARPA and they continued funding. And so we got those, and it was able to build 7 more homes for us. And then let's see, the competitive grants, the Indian Housing Block Grant competitive grants, that's how we're building all of our other units. So they all funnel through NAHASDA. And during the COVID pandemic, the U.S. Treasury received funding and they did tribal set-asides. So we were able to do emergency rental assistance program, and we were able to do the homeowner assistance fund. Those both were administered through the Housing Authority, and it was huge benefit for everyone who was living on the reservation. We served everyone, not just our tribal members. So anyway, we do as much as we can. We maximize every single dollar that we're presented with, and I'm trying to broaden our delivery of services so that they are more effective.
Thanks for that, Jody. I have one more question for you guys before we turn it over to audience questions. I know we have a lot in the chat here, and I'm trying to package some of these together with this next one. But I think you all have really noted the importance of partnerships and coordination, whether it's intergovernmental coordination at each level or with other organizations as well. So I'd like you to just touch a little bit more on the partnerships and coordination piece. How can the listeners here today partner with you to improve housing in Native communities, particularly given some of these unique challenges that you guys have discussed? And then also, what can states and local governments do to better support your work? And I know, even beyond some of the tribal lands issues, we know that there are about 70% of Native Americans that are living outside tribal lands, and maybe what are some of the lower hanging fruit there as we're waiting for some of these federal changes to come in?
Well, I think tribes and tribal organizations have proven to be great partners with a broad range of entities, whether it be federal, state, local government, foundations, investors, banks. I think we've shown we can do it. It was mentioned earlier that Nahaza is the cornerstone of tribal housing, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Getting Nahaza reauthorized is something that is so important. So if people really want to help, they can help us reauthorize Nahaza, improve the legislation, and ensure this funding well into the future. I think that would go a long way.
I'll jump in. Thank you, Paul. I want to encourage people to look at getting engaged with our organizations, our tribes, at the local, state, regional, or national level. NIHC, we have a legal symposium, a legislative conference, an annual convention and trade show. This coming May of 2026, our annual convention and trade show is going to be in Anchorage, Alaska, the first week of May. We're also going to tack on a couple extra days to have a summit called Housing All Our Relatives Summit, where we're bringing more people together that represent the whole spectrum of the housing needs, as was mentioned before, supportive housing, workforce housing, veterans housing. So, we're making that open invitation for people to come get engaged with us. We also have regional tribal housing associations that cover the country, the Northwest Indian Housing Association, the Great Lakes Intertribal Housing Association, the Southwest Indian Housing Association, the Great Plains. I could go on, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and other organizations. I can't remember off the top of my head, and then we also have Native homeownership coalitions that are doing really incredible work in several states. In my home state of Idaho, there's a new one getting off the ground. There are some that are very well established in different places that are doing amazing work. Dave, you might be able to share some examples. I know you've been very involved in those, and so has Jody.
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. As I mentioned, some of this work is really foundational. I think we take for granted, right? I talked about building codes, appraisals, conveyances. I just got a message from a tribal council member who said they're passing a budget component that is going to include support for homeownership on the reservation. And that came about because we were able to get folks from the secondary market and from the banks and from tribes together to say, hey, how can we work together? And I think that's really the core of it. AI is not going to be able to solve all our problems, folks, at least not in the interim. It's going to take humans, right? The humans are going to have to come together. And so I think that's what we're asking you to do is take a note from the good things that are happening in Oregon, at the state of Oregon, in terms of how they've reached out to tribes and are putting some new initiatives in place here in Arizona through the Industrial Development Authority or the Department of Housing. There have been some efforts there as well. State of New Mexico, I think Minneapolis, Minnesota. Just look around who is doing something. Kind of like that story I told about the guy from ADOH, getting to know someone from Hopi. All of a sudden, he had an interest and a connection. And then the question is, we've already got a program and we've already got a tribe who can qualify for it, but we've never talked. I've never, physically been on the Hopi lands, and she's never even looked at the application, but now it's available to her and I'm available to her and the resources available to the Hopi tribe. So it's going to take, especially as things are changing, and I think it'd be foolish to not recognize that we are going to experience some very significant changes over the next few years. And so that requires us, again, to come together if we haven't before. So I think that's again where it starts and where we need to kind of continue the effort. Thanks. Oh, and I will mention the housing coalitions. The Southwest Tribal Homeownership Coalition is there. I think they have a white paper available for the first private sale on the Navajo Nation, and they kind of show how that took place and all the regulatory, administrative, and other questions that were resolved through that process. But that's the kind of thing, it's kind of like busting out of a chrysalis, right? It wasn't difficult, but once you get there, it's beautiful. So take some time to learn about the good things that are happening that can be replicated.
And we do have a Native Homeownership Coalition for Montana that I'm a part of. And NeighborWorks Montana is the one who is the fiscal sponsor of the coalition. So we have received through my housing authority a grant from Wells Fargo, which was called an Invest Native Initiative. And we were able to hire a program coordinator for this coalition so that we can start having better traction, because everybody's already doing their full-time jobs. And so we needed to have someone specific to help that move forward. And thankfully, Wells Fargo partnered with us and gave us the funding to do that. And NeighborWorks partnered with us, and they're the ones who are building up that program coordinator so that he can learn how to function in the dominant society. And that's one thing that I don't think we really touched on, is on the reservation, we do things a certain way, the way we always did them. And it is sometimes in direct conflict of how the dominant society works. And so I feel like it's my job, my calling, to help my people get from the state of how we've always done it for the last couple hundred years and move them, progress them into the way that the dominant society expects us to work now. And it's very hard to learn these new life skills that we never had. Our whole way of life was changed. And we now live in homes that are stationary, and we get mortgages on them when we never used to have the same setup. We moved with the seasons, with the food, we migrated. It was different. And so it's like we're having to catch up with centuries of progress on the non-tribal side. And also surviving genocide, add that on top of it. And so it can, if you take a step back, you can see why we're at the state we're in at the moment, and then all the potential for us to move, because we are moving forward at lightning speed and we are evolving. And we're trying to preserve our culture while we evolve, and that's the delicacy. But we're doing it, and I couldn't be more proud of our progress. And I try to help all of my other Indian housing partners who aren't as progressed as we are. Our reservation was opened up to settlers in the early 1900s. And so my resources look a lot different than their resources. And so that's how we network with each other. Someone had put in the chat relationships run the world or whatever. That's how it works. And so the longer I can stay in this overwhelming, hard job, the more I can help my people progress. And I think that that longevity of someone continually trying to solve the problems, that's what is the most successful. And if we can give resources to help the people who are striving for progress, then we're going to get somewhere.
Thank you, Jody. Well said. I want to turn to one of the questions in the chat, which is talking about any sorts of innovative or new and promising approaches you're noticing or have noticed in the tribal housing space. So maybe what's the most interesting thing that you're seeing out there, whether it's locally, tribally, nationally, globally?
So one that I'm particularly excited about is one that the ink's not dry on it yet, so I'll talk about it in general. But banks, when they merge, generally will identify ways to shore up the shortcomings that will come out of the merger. And one bank has been talking about investing, to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase mortgages that are originated in a certain geography, and with a preference of at least 10% for mortgages originated on tribal trust lands. And so with that, with the knowledge that there's a place for those mortgages to go once they're originated, there's a tribe who was encouraged by that and said, hey, we can create a tribal housing trust fund. We know that states have housing trust funds, but very few tribes do. Most tribes focus on low and moderate income households, and there just isn't a resources for those over income households. So the idea was, if we could develop a partnership with this bank who's willing to purchase these and put a priority or a premium on the purchase of these mortgages that originate on tribal trust lands, we can meet them halfway to make sure that the risk that might be perceived in originating these mortgages is addressed by committing some funds for a down payment assistance fund or a rate buy down or some other tool. And then that's the idea, right? Is we need to pile on, right? If the bank's willing to do this and the tribe's willing to do this, what is the state willing to do? And where does the nonprofit CDFI partner or mortgage originator come in? And so this is how we kind of get the ball rolling by getting commitments from these once disparate parties to come together. So that's one thing that's in play, and I'll be looking forward to maybe reporting on that as that develops further.
I would say Native American nonprofit developers. When you're not driven by profit margins, you can do a lot. If you're driven by the mission statement, you can accomplish so much more for the benefit of the community. So NAIA's dabbling in it right now. We're not the only ones. I think more of that would be better for Indian country.
I'll just jump in to quickly say, what's been exciting for me. I've been in this role as executive director for NIHC for only 6 months, but it's taken me to many tribal communities across the country, and you're starting to see tribes as, it's not as well known of a story as it could and should be, that while in some places rural community populations have declined, well, in tribal in areas where tribes that have engaged in gaming and diversified their economy, they're more often than not the largest employer in their county, in their region, sometimes maybe even in the state, among the highest employers, and that benefits everyone, and that creates more opportunities for other small businesses, and tribes are starting to utilize their revenues to provide for housing solutions as well, and there's more interest in that. So as we've started to see some of these off reservation developments move forward, I think I've started to see more leaders look at ways that they can even diversify some of the projects, because our tribal housing authorities aren't often just building housing. I mean, they're doing essential community facilities, and their employees are doing more than just what their jobs are. Whether it's maintenance, other public safety components of the community's needs. So it's growing, it's expanding, and there's lots of reasons to be hopeful.
And if I could just say one thing really quick, what I've noticed is that we have more people who seem to want to help, right? When I first started, I was starting to build my relationships, and now, I mean, we are on your webinar right now. We are getting more support. We are getting more of the spotlight, more seats at the table. We are becoming part of that dominant society. We are immersing into that space. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our story, to teach you who we are, and to see how we can collaborate, because that's what's going to make the biggest difference. So that desire to come together is what I'm witnessing, and I really appreciate that the collective humanity in the United States is wanting to make better decisions.
Thank you. I know we are at time, so I just want to echo all of the thanks that I've seen in the chat to our amazing panelists. You guys truly are such incredible advocates and do invaluable work for your communities, and we're really grateful to have had you take the time out of your busy schedules to share with us today. We look forward to working with you moving forward, and also thank all of you again for tuning into this conversation, and for your commitment to this work, and improving access to housing for all communities across the West. So we will post this webinar on our YouTube channel and then our website as well, and send it out to all of you. Any other questions in the chat, I'll see if we can get those over to our panelists to answer. And they may even be willing to share their contact information with you all too. So we will be in touch, and thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.